The US military has admitted that the training we are giving Ukrainian troops, it's not the greatest, but it will do. Now, as far as Ukraine is concerned, they don't have an issue with any of the training. In fact, they are learning really fast and they're doing a really good job. But there's issues with language, there's issues with money, and there's issues overall with the timing it takes to train all of these troops. So please stick with me in this video because we are going to learn a lot and how we are really accelerating the training that the Ukrainians are getting, and it's quite amazing how fast we are able to train Ukrainian troops and get them back on the front lines in Ukraine. Now, the first thing you need to know is that we've actually been training Ukrainian troops for a long time. It's only been public as of recently. In fact, there was a CIA, not necessarily a leak, but a CIA publication that we've been training Ukrainian troops even when Russia was first messing with Ukraine back in 2014. The biggest issue when it came to military training, as in US military to Ukrainian troops, according to this investigation, is that Ukrainian troops were not given manuals in Ukrainian on like how to fix things or to maintain things. And for those of you who are not aware, when it comes to Army field manuals, I kid you not, I was in the US Army. There's nearly a field manual for every single thing ever. Like, I'm just gonna pick something off from my table here. There's probably a field manual on how to properly eat a donut from your plate and not leave some stains on the plate. But again, back to the point, this is starting to get to the language barrier issue. And here's the thing, we are training so many Ukrainian troops, and there are Ukrainian interpreters, but the timeline we are pushing these Ukrainian troops through with the training, there are still language issues here, and let me explain. Okay, so when it comes to training internally within the US military, between the Marines, the US Army, the training is a little different, but there typically is what's called standardization and timelines. Like basic training will be 9 weeks, etc. Now, when it comes to training specific pieces of equipment, there's also timelines in training and standardization. So for example, the 155 howitzer, for the most part, it takes about 6 to 7 weeks to become quote unquote proficient with that piece of equipment. Guess how long we are training Ukrainian troops with this piece of equipment? 6 days. So when you go from 7 to 6 weeks to 6 days, we're talking a really fast pipeline to get Ukrainian troops through this training. When you add that there are language barriers here, you can kind of see why the US military used the word inadequate training. The training is good, but it's inadequate, which means there are missing pieces that most likely Ukrainian troops are not getting the full training. Because I'll tell you this, even as a combat engineer, when I was doing all of my training, I didn't necessarily understand all of it or get all of it until I actually did the hands-on portions outside of my actual training portions. And that's why I always say, basic training is the easiest part of the military because you're just trying to learn as fast as you can. When you get to the real military, or in Ukraine's case, the actual front lines, that's where your actual training, and that's where everything you learned before, put it all together, and whatever you didn't learn, you better learn real fast. Now, there is a slight caveat to this entire report looking into Ukrainian-US training. A lot of the Ukrainian fighters actually have and had combat experience who were training with US troops, which became a very interesting dynamic, if you will. Because here you have Ukrainian troops who have gone through something that a lot of US troops have not gone through. Like fighting in Afghanistan, fighting against the Taliban is a totally different thing when you're fighting against a 21st century professional military who's using drones and has the exact same equipment as you, i.e. Russia. Look, this played in favor of the Ukrainians because even though they didn't speak English, having that combat experience and seeing what the Americans were doing, this helped them out a lot, and this sort of justified the combat actions they were doing against Russia. Now, as far as the logistical aspect of all of this training we're doing for Ukraine, there have been some issues and there has been a lot of rushing going on, and because of that, we are seeing reports like this that the Pentagon accounting error provides an extra $6.2 billion for Ukrainian military aid. Some of you are saying, well, what's the issue? That sounds like good news. We get to give $6 billion more to Ukraine. Look, that's great, but here's the issue. That's a massive error to mess up a $6.2 billion transaction. And throughout the investigations and reporting on training with the Ukrainians, when it came to logistics, there are certain timelines that need to be met when it comes to classifications of security. And what I mean by that is, there are certain pieces of equipment that can't just be sent to any country. There has to be like an entire investigation done on whether or not that country is able to handle that equipment, won't lose that equipment, and will be able to be successful with that equipment. And when it comes to Ukraine, on all levels, everything is being expedited, which is why we had a $6 billion error. Essentially what happened is the accounting department for the US military overanalyzed or overspent how much money we are going to give Ukraine. So they took some of that money back and overevaluated what our equipment is actually worth. Now look, not all the blame is on the US military, because when you look at Ukraine, since all of this money and all this logistics is going to Ukraine, they have to somehow manage all of this, and they are also learning. Look, getting billions upon billions of dollars, getting all this new equipment, sending people to Germany, sending them back, this is not necessarily an easy task, even for like the US military. To be fair, Ukraine is doing everything they can to handle the entire situation. Obviously, at the time of making this video, they're in the middle of a counteroffensive. The dam had recently broke. Russia's not letting aid workers help with the people who are struggling from the dam being taken out. So again, we do have to show a little bit of grace to Ukraine because they are learning as we go. When most people think about training and military operations, we only think about the combat space. But as they say with logistics, bullets don't fly without supply. And that really is true. A lot of the training that's going on, especially with Ukraine, has to do with logistical training and supply training. And throughout all of military history, without logistics and supply, your military will fail. So look, overall, this was actually a very, very positive report. I mean, when you really think about it, all of a sudden you have troops who don't speak English, you have English troops who don't speak Ukrainian, they are coming together and they are trying to give you the fastest training as possible and the highest quality training as possible. And look, the equipment in the US military, not all of it is necessarily easy to use. And even some of the equipment that is easy to use, when you actually put it into practice, it can be difficult. Because look, I can teach you how to tie every single knot in the world, and I can tell you this knot is good for securing stuff to your body, this knot is good for rappelling. But if I'm only given 6 days, and then when you go to the front lines in combat operations and your brain is getting all scrambled and confused and you're stressed out, you miss your family, this is why going from training to actual application, the application part is the true training and the true test of what you learn. And something else I want to add, Ukrainian troops are highly motivated. Highly motivated. I mean, when you compare training US troops to Afghan troops, that was a complete disaster, and that was even unmotivating for the US troops because the US military knew that we are completely wasting our time training the Afghan military, thus we had the downfall of Afghanistan. Nonetheless, when you look at Ukraine, you're starting to see progress. And also, you're starting to see motivation. Afghani troops were there because they had to be. Ukrainian troops are there because they need to be. That's the complete difference. Anyway, let me know what you guys think. This was overall mostly positive. Let me know if you guys think that the training needs to be slowed down a little bit or if you think everything is going A-okay. My name is T-SPLY, and we'll see you later.